Greetings, Commanders. As details of the Python Mk2 configuration have become available, I have been bombarded on Discord about questions on when a build video is going to come out regarding an AX version of a Python Mk2. And the answer to that is, well, not until I get my hands on it and I get to actually test it and try out a few things firsthand. As the builds we put out, as a reminder, aren't just paper theory crafting. They have been refined and tested through battle with consideration not just to modules and hardport placements, but with regards to how the ship performs in an actual combat configuration, on thermals, on speed, on maneuverability, on its mass, on pretty much everything. So until we have a chance to test it ourselves, we're not going to be putting out a build video. But we can talk about the ship in general, how it probably is going to fit into a meta, what is good about it, what is not so good about it, and what kind of builds do we want to test, and what do we have in the pipeline as far as trying things out, which is a bit of a preview and I think the best we can do at this point in time. So where will the Python Mk2 fit overall? The Python Mk2 is probably closest to the Mamba and FDL as far as its overarching configuration is concerned. It has pretty strong shields for a ship its size. It has also very limited optional internal modules, which make it lean towards a shield build of all things. It also has maneuverability comparable to the FDL and Chieftain, which should be nice, at least as listed in the game. The remarkable thing of the Python Mk2, as everybody noticed probably by this point, is its hardpoint configuration of 4 large and 2 medium hardpoints, which is unprecedented on a medium-class ship. It allows for the mounting, in theory, we'll get why in practice that's not a good idea, the mounting of 4 modified guardian weapons, or it allows for mounting 4 weapons that benefit from larger sizes, such as all the old shard cannons, such as azimuth multi-cannons, such as Cirrus missile racks, and the like. So its hardpoint setup is very enticing. The shield-oriented nature of the ship, though, is a limiting factor, similar to how it's a limiting factor for the Mamba and the FDL when it comes to anti-xeno combat. The hardpoint situation is challenging. Like the fact that there's only one optional internal of size 5 or more means that you need to put a repair input controller in that slot, and you have pretty significant limited space for hard reinforcement packages and for limpet storage for using that repair input controller and for module reinforcements and the like. So it will be a squishy ship if you build it towards a hull tank. It should do well as a shield tank for a situation where shield tanks perform well, noting that anti-xeno combat generally is not one of those arrangements. Shields in anti-xeno combat are more of a liability than an asset, which works against the Python Mk2 as far as the ideal configuration of its ship for anti-xeno activities. But it does have a few things going for it, so let's go for it in a moment. As I mentioned, the shields are very good and aligned to the Mamba and just short of the FDL, at least at first impressions. The hardpoint placement are the best of pretty much any medium-class ship. When it comes to core modules, the power distributor is probably the one thing that strikes out as the most significant difference, as in it has a power distributor class 6, which is all but the crate have. The crate, however, does have a class 7 power plant and a class 7 power distributor, which for several classes of weapons actually makes a big difference. Many Guardian weapons are distro limited. They are not hardpoint limited. And as a result, the crate edges out with specific types of weapons, notably Gauss cannons and plasma chargers. For Gauss cannons and plasma chargers, because of its larger distro, the crate will remain the best platform overall. And the Python Mk2 just will not be able to make use of its larger hardpoints. There is no large Guardian Gauss cannon. And yes, there are the old Guardian plasma chargers, but those are so incredibly distro heavy that even the Crate Mk2 struggles to use reliably 3 of those. So forget about using 3 or more on the Python Mk2. It's just a non-starter. So what is the Python Mk2 likely going to be good at, and what can we reliably expect to test when it comes to builds? Well, a few things. Well, first and foremost, the Python Mk2 does make for a good candidate for Titan Killer 3.0b, the bomber configuration of a ship intended to do as much core damage, thermal core damage to a Titan as possible. It's able to equip 4 large Sirius missile racks, which are the most damaging weapons to the thermal core, while also retaining a medium gimbal beam laser, which is also one of the most popular changes and variations on the 2.0 version of the Titan Killer, which is based on the crate, while also having a medium slot set aside for nanite torpedoes. Now, depending on how the ship will handle and its overall speed and velocity and performance in combat, we'll see how practical and reliable it is, in particular whether it can reliably hit 8 vents on any given cycle, which the Mamba can reliably do, and the crate cannot reliably do, but it can do well enough. So that's why I think the crate currently is the most popular combination of like ship for both vent bomb runs and for thermal core damage. The counterpoint to this ship, as compared to the version 2.0 based on the crate, is that this ship is a lot more squishy. It has a lot less hull, and it has a lot less survivability. It only carries 16 instead of 64 limpets. So you have to be a bit more careful with this ship. You can't just quite go in and ignore what's happening around you and just tank the damage and go repair and spam limpets. Here, you need to be careful about the damage you take, and you need to be careful about not wasting your repair limpets while you are in Titan space, since, as you all know, there is no easy way to restock limpets in Titan space. On the flip side, you do get 2 additional utilities, which is a nice quality of life and comfort factor, which allows you to have 2 caustic sink launchers and 3 Sirius heat sinks, which is nice, or you can sort of probably switch this and put even 3 caustic sinks. But all in all, like what you put in those utilities isn't going to make a difference for the intended purpose of this build, which is to bomb vents and do as much thermal core damage as possible. Considering that the version 2.0 of this build has the same amount of missiles but has 1 smaller missile rack, the ship should do just barely more than that ship in terms of overall damage, which means it should do somewhere between 42 and 43% of a thermal core by itself on a really good run with 8 vents hit. Which means that, as usual, 3 ships like this are sufficient to take down the thermal core to 0 on any given cycle. The change you may want to make if you want to take just 2 of these in Titan space and 0 the core on each run is you may want to drop the thermal vent beam for a medium Sirius missile rack. But in order to do that, you need to put in an experimental weapon stabilizer, which in turn sacrifices your Class 3 modular reinforcement package, which makes you even more squishy. So depending on how glass cannony you want to go, you could make that modification and you could go with that. I personally wouldn't, because just getting into Titan space and getting an unlucky Fargon strike and seeing a rebuy screen once you even barely started on a bombing run is no fun. So I don't mind squishy ships, but there is such thing as too squishy, and dropping to a single MRP, furthermore the smallest MRP being in a 1 slot, would be way too squishy for me. But again, if it works for you, build whatever you want and see if it works for you. So anyway, this is what we're working as far as design for the next iteration and the next version of the Titan Killer Bomber version. When it comes to the fighter version, this one I think is one I'm personally actually even more excited, and I want to say this is probably one of the probably best uses of the Python Mk2 as far as like a configuration that just works well on it and which didn't work well on other ships before. You are able to equip 4 of the large gimbaled Azimuth pre-engineered enhanced anti-xeno multi-cannons, which are pre-engineered with overcharged and autoloaded. The good thing about this is you are also able to equip 2 medium gimbaled beam lasers with thermal vent, which, so long as your distributor lasts, which won't be very long, but so long as it lasts, is actually able to cool your multi-cannons. And when you're not firing multi-cannons, is able to cool your ship off very rapidly. So this ship essentially allows you to fire Azimuth multi-cannons while staying cold, and furthermore fire 4 of them on a pretty mobile platform, which also has a significant number of heat sinks to boot for situations where you do need the additional cooling or you do need the additional weapon recharge effect that heat sinks grant you. In overall, I don't know, I just like this on paper. We'll see how it handles in practice. Again, it is more squishy than the Crate Mark II, but this thing is going to hit like a truck. It'll just delete scouts. It will hit interceptors really hard. It will also do a significant amount of thermal core damage with this gun configuration, all the while being able to remain very cold and operate extremely effectively with its combination of multi-cannons and gimbal demilitises. Gimbal multi-cannons are also the most brain-dead AX weapons that exist, and Azimuth gimbal multi-cannons are the most powerful and hardest-hitting gimbaled weapons that do exist, with the downside of being relatively expensive in terms of materials to unlock, as they are pay per module, and the fact that they run very hot. So you need pretty solid cooling arrangements to stay cold while firing these if you're going to be using them. They're also comparatively distro heavy for a multi-cannon, but multi-cannons are not distro heavy to begin with. So like the fact that you only have a class 6 power distributor in the ship as compared to a class 7 of the Crate should not be an overall deal breaker for these weapons. Although, keep in mind, you will not be able to fire all these weapons, including the beams, on a sustained basis for a very long period of time. You'll need to have some reasonable trigger discipline, using multi-cannons and then using beams to cool and playing with that on and off kind of arrangement. But with that kind of on and off arrangement, this thing will, again, as I said, absolutely delete scouts. It will do a good amount of thermal core damage. It's viable also in situations where you may be at fire sites and hunting offers, even if it's not optimal, it will work decently over there as well. All in all, it's a significant step up in terms of a fighter build, and more of a step up, I want to say, than the Bomber variant. The Bomber variant is a marginal incremental step up. This is a significant step up for a fighter build. So this is probably the build that I'm the most excited as far as the Python Mark II is concerned. What else we got that we want to test? The 3.0S, the Spires version of this ship. And maybe just before we go to this one, there's anything else significant I need to highlight? No, I talked about all the modules and the changes I would have made here. So when it comes to the Spire specialty version of the ships, there are a few tweaks. So the weapon of choice for this build are the large, fixed Guardian shard cannons with an anti-Guardian field effect. Furthermore, I would recommend, if you're going to use this for Spires, or generally speaking, since you're mounting fixed weapons, to replace the gimbaled version of the beam lasers with a fixed version of the beam lasers. The reason I suggest switching this is because fixed beam lasers can hit scouts and do a reasonable amount of damage to them. Gimbaled realistically cannot, unless you're literally at point blank. So you can shoot scouts with these. You cannot really shoot scouts with a gimbaled version. I mean, you can shoot scouts with shards for sure, but it's generally a waste of ammo because their spread is very wide. Your ammo is generally comparatively limited as compared to, for example, plasma chargers. And personally, if I'm at Spires, I don't want to waste my shard ammo on scouts. I want to use it on orifices. So I want something else that can hit scouts, and fixed beam lasers are that other thing. These also do more damage as a bonus value to shields as well. So in case you're, again, wanting to just finish off a shield without wasting shroud ammo, you can use this to finish off a shield. And if you have a lot of ships using fixed beams, they do a lot of damage, and again, they'll kind of bring shields down pretty quickly. The change from a utility standpoint that we put to this ship is we actually suggest kitting now an ECM, as we've learned, credit to a commander in the Xeno Strike Force group, that electronic countermeasures actually work against Banshee missiles, which is something that we didn't think was the case, but we've seen conclusive evidence that it is the case. So you can use ECM to dodge Banshee missiles if Banshees are still up, which is a nice quality of life element. And then, since you don't really need a Fargoid post neutralizer, especially if you use ECM to avoid the Banshee missiles, we recommend kitting a shutdown field neutralizer, which protects not only you, but also your fellow commanders in the instance, and furthermore, uses less distributed power, which means it can stay up longer, which means it's more likely to protect you from a shutdown pulse than a Fargoid pulse neutralizer version. Other than that, the build is identical as far as optional and core internals. Note, this is still an AX standard hull tank, which compared to some of the things that you might be used if you're flying crates over there or similar ships, is comparatively squishy. So just be mindful of that. Guardian shard cannons with an AGF effect do suffer from a 20% damage effect. But the good thing about large shards is they are incredibly effective at just absolutely deleting shields. And 4 of these on, again, a mobile platform like this one, especially if you have a few of these shipped in the instance, render you immune from the AGF field that orifices fire when aggroed, and will allow even less experienced commanders to go hunting at spires and not worry about their weapons getting damaged and having to repair them and just figuring out how to deal with those situations. Shard cannons, although they don't quite have the same damage staying power of plasma chargers, let alone of modified plasma chargers, are a lot easier to use. And again, for beginner/intermediate commanders and medium organization level instances, I think this will be a good build. It will not be as effective as the Cytoplasma Conda in well-organized builds. That will remain the ceiling, if you want, of what you can accomplish at spires. But for the average commander, it is a build that, furthermore, is a lot less expensive in terms of materials, as the large Guardian shard cannon is a one-time unlock, and the anti-AGF engineering is a relatively minor engineering exercise. So pretty much intermediate friendly. So whereas there's still unengineered builds that we put out there for spires, which are the more beginner friendlies, I think this version of a Python Mk2 will become the more or less default intermediate commander build for spires, with the Cytoplasma Conda, the NPC Conda remaining at the very top of a more endgame version of spires. We've also tried to see if, or we want to try, because I haven't tried yet, we want to try to see if a shielded version, akin to the evolution of a Titan Bomber Mamba for this ship, could work in the spirit of creating a wing-based bomber version of the Python Mk2. And in this case, as you'll see, we trade internals to equip a shield. And notably, if the thermal of the ship follow anything close to the Mamba, the other trade-off that we need to make for this ship to be effective in Titan space is to trade the dirty drives with drag drives with clean drives with thermal spread. The reason for that is because shields actually generate a lot of heat, not only when being installed, but especially when they are regenerating, and even more so when they are rebuilding after being broken. In order for this ship to operate under the 20% threshold, which is generally necessary to survive any amount of time in Titan space, we need to bring that heat generation down to a level that doesn't result in the whole instance aggroing us from pretty much everywhere in the map and consequently us dying very, very fast. In order to do that, we go enhanced low power plus low draw on a 6A standard shield, which by the way is nice because it means you're not using prismatics or anything that requires an unlock, a power play unlock. And then we put 0E shield boosters with heavy duty 5 and supercapacitors to go with it, which gives you the best bang for your buck as far as power consumption versus shield capacity as a whole. We furthermore put a small turreted pulse laser with long range and concordant sequence to support each other as a wing, while doing whatever you do in Titan bombing vents or kind of other, well, not other things. Those are two things that you're doing when you're in Titan space with a ship like this. This is a bit more specialized build. It plays to the strengths of the Python Mk2 in terms of being a shield tank by kind of its own nature. But it is a more technical ship to use, and it really relies on being a wing that with people that support each other. As a reminder, concordance sequence only works if you're in a wing with each other. You cannot just concordance sequence some random commander in the instance. You have to be in a wing for the effect to apply. So it's kind of really limited to operate in a generally well-trained and high-performing wing. That being said, it does play to the strengths of the Python Mk2 as far as being more of a shield tank is concerned, and it will probably fly a little bit like the Titan Bomber Mamba, with the difference that now you have twice as many serious missile racks. So you're increasing the damage capacity of a ship to a very, very significant level. Like, the contrast between this ship is clearly sort of like to be contrasted with the bomber version or hull tank version of the Python Mk2, which has more or less the same hardpoint configuration. Obviously, the difference is a thermal vent beam versus this is a concordant sequence one, but instead relies on a more traditional hull tank arrangement, and there's an additional heat sinks versus the wing bomber version of the Python Mk2. This build is probably more effective in a highly trained wing, and definitely less effective if you're flying solo or if you're flying in a kind of disorganized wing or in a disorganized instance. So I anticipate and expect most commanders to go and build something along the lines of the bomber version of a Python Mk2, or potentially the multi-cannon version, as I think this is going to be surprisingly effective as well. I think the wing bomber version is going to be a much more specialized build that, for instance, we in the Xeno Strike Force might end up using because we train a lot together and we're pretty well practiced at supporting each other with like concordant sequence and the like. But that's not the general reality for AX commanders out there, and consequently, this will probably be a lot more niche and a lot more specialized build. What else? Stuff that won't work particularly well, or at least not better than the Krait Mark II or other similar builds. Gauss cannons. Gauss cannons are way too distributor hungry. They are effectively limited by your power distributor on the ship, and the Krait has a bigger power distributor than the Python Mark II. On the Python Mark II, you will be limited to the same 3 medium Gauss cannons that a 6A power distributor can equip, and even then you are already overdrawn, so you will already not be able to sustain that at full fire rate. You can make Gauss work, of course, like all things, where there's a will, there's a way, but reality is Gauss will work a lot better on the Krait and on the Chief and the Charlie, which are more likely than not, not more likely than not, they're much better hull tanks, and consequently they're, generally speaking, much better AX ships for general purpose reasons. The other thing that really will not work well on the ship for similar reasons is plasma chargers, including their modified Guardian plasma chargers, with or without the anti-Guardian field mod. These are even more distributor hungry than Gauss. The Krait Mark II struggles with 3 of these, with its Class 7 distributor, which is significantly more powerful than the Class 6 distributor that the Python Mark II will have. If you are a humongous fan of plasma chargers, again, when there's a will, there's a way, and you can probably make it work. However, as far as plasma chargers are concerned, the Krait is just a much better platform for those. And if you're looking at plasma chargers for specific purposes like at Spires, then you will want to go an even higher distributor level and take the Anaconda, which makes for the best modified plasma charger platform in the game because of its huge distro and the fact that it can equip 6 of them in its hardpoints with pretty good convergence. So I would not advise trying plasma chargers on the new Python Mark II, or rather, try them, but I don't think they're going to work particularly well. Let's say it that way. And then finally, and probably the more controversial / on the fence one, is modified Guardian shard cannons, which up to this point were considered broadly the best weapon to use against interceptors in situations where anti-Guardian fields were not a concern. Now, these cannot be engineered for AGF resistance because they are already pre-engineered, and consequently, you cannot take these to Titan space. You can take them to Spires, but you will be vulnerable to the anti-Guardian field effect. And furthermore, while they do a good amount of damage, they don't do nearly as much damage to shields as their large counterparts for the old versions, which can be engineered for the anti-Guardian field effect do. So for many of the purposes that entail or require using shards or using other kind of weapons, is like not such strong of a case for them to kind of mount them on a ship that can do much better in a different configuration. So personally, I think the Crate will remain a much better platform when it comes to the usage of mod shards, because it has a larger distributor, which means fewer issues firing them, fewer heat spikes. The most you can really equip on a build that doesn't become a meme build anyway is 4. You could put a 5th on a Python Mk2 in order to sort of more reliably give Cyclops, but you would have to trade the class 3 slot in an already very slot limited ship to put an experimental weapon stabilizer there, which would make you even more squishy. If you really wanted to go full on glass cannon and put 6 modified shard cannons, which as far as solo combat would be probably the most alpha strike powerful build that you can imagine, you would have to give up your class 6 slot, which would make you into really a meme build at that point. Yes, you have humongous alpha strike, but you're going to die very, very quickly to anything but, a light breeze in your face. So personally, I'd never do that other than sort of like for the sake of the memes. At some point, you'd get bored very easily, and it's just not a good or reliable build. So besides that, there's some stuff we don't know about and that we need to test before crafting final builds that we kind of announced there as sort of like more of a reference. We don't know the thermals of this ship yet. We don't know what the heat capacity is. As a corollary, we don't know how heat specs perform when firing various weapons. We need more information on that. We also don't know what the minimum and maximum heat dissipation of the ship is. As a corollary, we don't know what the idling temp of various configuration is going to be, which means we don't know how viable some of the builds up that we just talked about are going to be in practice as far as their thermals are concerned. In particular, I think about the shielded version of this because of the very, very strict limitations that shielded builds have in Titan space as far as thermals are concerned. And speed. Like, we know that its base speed is significant, but we'll see how that plays out. We'll see if it can outrun a Basilisk, which probably can. We'll try and understand what its boost multiplier is going to be, which, at least from initial information that's coming my way, seems it's higher than the Crate and the Chieftain, but lower than the FDL. Still, this is gearing up to be a very fast ship, and that's a good thing. And if that is the case, and if its acceleration is good, then it may be a ship that can more reliably than the Crate hit 8 vents reliably, which would make it, again, a plus towards its overarching bomber configuration. And then handling, we just need to see how it handles, again, how its pitch and yaw and roll rates are going to be, besides its general maneuverability rating given in the game, which kind of doesn't mean very much. And we need to see how it handles on the boost in terms of boost multiplier. We just need to get a feel of like how the ship handles for something that is sort of hard to quantifiably state, but it's actually very important as far as the handling of a ship in combat is concerned. So that wraps what we have to say in terms of initial impressions for the Python Mk2. Again, we'll give it a spin once it does release. We'll try it out in these configurations and maybe a few more to get a sense of like what works and what doesn't in actual practice. And then probably come around May 10th or so, we'll put out a video with our actual recommendations with regards to what builds we recommend for the Python Mk2 in an AX setting. Obviously, the Python Mk2 is also a ship that is has an eye towards PvP. But honestly, I personally know very, very little about PvP, and I am far from the best person to recommend PvP builds for the Python Mk2. So I will abstain from making a fool myself and trying. But again, we will put out some build recommendations for an AX version, or multiple versions of the AX Python, actually, for the purposes that we're describing in this document here. With that, Commander Mk2, over and out. And again, if you like these videos, please don't forget to like and subscribe, as it helps grow this channel and encourages us to make more of these videos. Glory to Mankind!